We're all worried about the pandemic. One way I can help is to give you a feel for how a pandemic works. How does a virus move through a population? What about those things that they're asking us to do, like washing our hands or social distancing? What about this curve that everyone's talking about? What does it mean to flatten it? Is it important? I'm Robert Heckendorn. I teach computer science at the University of Idaho, and I think I can help by showing a simple computer simulation of how an epidemic works. No computer knowledge is necessary. I'll do the driving. Before we begin, here are a couple of points I want to make. First, simulation and animation are not the same thing. Animation is something Disney does to tell a story. It has a fixed plot, the outcome is known, and there's a big song and dance number. Simulation, on the other hand, is a super simplified recreation of reality in a computer. It usually highlights some features of the system that we want to understand. It lets us play with it without actually crashing planes, or in our case, having anyone die of a disease. Our simulation is very, very simple, but it's still informative. It will let us look at things like the spread of a virus and things that we might be able to do to slow that spread. A simulation is a very powerful tool because it lets us ask what-if questions. What if we do this? Well, let's run the simulation. What if we do that? Let us run the simulation and see what happens. This brings us to my second point. This is not a precise simulation of all the intricacies of a real pandemic. We do not predict any real numbers, such as the number of people that are sick from COVID-19 next week. It predicts trends. It allows us to play out our options in advance and gives us a feel for what's going on. And I think that's important. So now for the fun part, let's go play with the simulation and see what it tells us about epidemics. Looks a bit complicated, but it really isn't. Let me show you where our simulation is run, right in this screen right here. These individuals here live in this screen and they move around in this screen. They may be well, like this individual, or sick, indicated by the red color of this individual. As they move around the screen, when they move off one side, they pop in the other side so that they can mix with each other and they're on the screen at all times. How is it that they move? It's very, very simple. They take a step and then they take a random turn to the right and to the left, and then they take another step and a random turn to the right or left. If that random turn is limited so that they can hardly move to the right or left at all, they'll tend to run in a straight line. If they swing wildly from right to left, because there's almost no limits on how they turn, then they tend to stay in one place. They tend to almost look like they're dancing in one place. Let's see that happen. So I've set it up here, and now I'm going to slow it down so that it doesn't go way too fast, so we can hopefully see it. And right now, they are limited by an angle of 0 here, the wiggle angle. So they can't move anything to the right or left. And when that happens, they move in straight lines. As you can see, follow this guy, right? This guy moving in a straight line. They're all moving in straight lines, and they're meeting up with other individuals on the screen. If I take this wiggle angle and I slowly move it so they start wiggling from side to side, now they're moving a little bit to the left and to the right between each step, and they kind of begin to wander, but they have a kind of a general direction. As I keep moving this guy farther and farther and farther, they wiggle more and more and more until eventually they're almost dancing in place. Why is this important? Because this is like social distancing, right? Because if you're dancing in place, you aren't running into other individuals all over the screen. While if you're going in a straight line, you're meeting all these other individuals. Social distancing limits who we talk to or who we have the chance of passing the virus to. Another control we have is the percent make sick. Let me go back and set this up again and point to the guy that's got the virus. He has the virus. If he arrives on the same square as someone else who is well, there's a probability that he'll pass that disease on. I can control that here. For instance, if he arrives at a square with a well individual and he runs up to them, puts their arm around them, gives them a big slobbery kiss, and breathes all over them, well then the odds that they're going to pass the disease is really high. If they arrive at there and they've washed their hands and they're not sharing any objects that they can pass the disease on, and they're wearing masks, then the probability of passing disease from one to the other is much, much lower. So that's represented by this slider. So for review, this slider controls how they move and controls what appears to be social distancing. This is a lot like being washing your hands and wearing a mask. So we can see how these two things affect how the virus passes through the population. Let's get enough people here in the population so that we can get the disease to pass on. Here's 2,000 individuals. Way down here is the single guy that's got the virus, and we want to see how well it spreads. So we're not going to pay any attention to social distancing. I'm going to leave this percent make sick here at 40, which is, it's just a made up number. We're just going to call it the percent of making someone else sick. And then let's see how the disease passes from one individual to another. As it moves along, you see, they run into other individuals. There's a probability that it gets passed on, and we see that. The yellow is the ones that have recovered. There's no death in this simulation, so it's just as time goes by, the number of yellow individuals gets more and more and more, and they cannot catch the disease again. Over here is the number of red individuals represented by this red line. And right now, it's over 21%, and let me speed up the simulation just a little bit. And so far, 70% of the population is sick. Right now, we're running at 13%. Right now, we're at 13%, but we got as high as 21.5%. Why is that important? Because if your hospitals only have beds for 2%, what are you going to do with the other 20%? They're not going to get the health care, and the mortality rate will be higher than if we had hospital beds for everybody. Why is the curve dropping off? It's dropping off because if you look, this individual here, for instance, is only going to run into more yellow individuals. And they cannot get sick because they've already had it. And that's because currently 70% of the population has been sick. We can keep running this. 80%, 90%. Eventually the disease dies out because there are no more well individuals to catch the disease. Everyone has got immunity to it. And so unlike flu, which mutates from year to year and presents a new flu every season, I haven't added that to this simulation. We don't, in fact, know what it will do for COVID-19. So this is a pretty dire situation. This is kind of the baseline situation. Was there anything we can do? Well, we know we can try social distancing, so let's give it a shot. Social distancing would mean increase this wiggle angle so they dance in place and they don't come in contact with as many people. Let's give it a shot. Here's our sick individual. Go. The curve's not quite as steep. It got up to 20-some%, and we're now at 11, 10, 9, and it's rolling off. Still not ideal, but so much better. In the end, still very many people get sick. Well, let's take our individuals and do social distancing. And let's not do social distancing and try washing our hands. So we'll be washing our hands and wearing a mask and reduce the probability of transmission. Here's our individual and go. Again, it's better. It's not the 22%, but it's still overwhelming our hospitals. Well, maybe the thing to do is do both. So I'm going to do social distancing And I'm going to cut down the percent by washing hands and using a mask. Let's try it again. And here's our individual down here. Let's see what happens. So here's the graph. Right now, 1% are infected. The infection's struggling to get off because everyone is hanging out around home, and it's hard to transmit the disease from one individual to another. This is where we want to be in the long run. We want it to be hard to go from one individual to another. Hospitals in this artificial world could probably handle this kind of load. Right now, a total of 4%, 5% have been sick. Disease is having a real hard time getting going. This is a curve that has been flattened. So instead of numbers like 20%, we're looking at numbers like 2, 3, 4%. Well, that's good. What if we've tried the scenario where we weren't doing anything? We got, say, 22% infected at one time. We've tried separately hand washing and then separately distancing, and they helped. They did a good job. They perhaps halved the number that were sick at any one moment. But doing them both together, that really helped. It really reduced the amount of infection. This is still mostly green, way after it would have been mostly yellow. Remember, yellow, if we had a mortality rate, those are the ones that are rolling a die to see if they survive. Well, let's try one last scenario. And in this case, I'm going to run our social distancing model like this one, but I'm going to change it partway through. I'm going to say, oh, it's really great. We have this solved. And I'm going to lift the social distancing standards. And let's see what happens. So here we are. We've started off. Our curve's doing really nice. We're managing it really well. And now I'm going to do no more, social distancing. I didn't move that fast enough. I talked to him. It was doing a really good job too. I was talking and, okay, there's our individual. And now I'm going to suddenly change it so that we're no longer social distancing. Okay, so let's review what happened. We were going along and we had maybe 2% were sick at a time. And before the disease died out, I grabbed hold of the social distancing slider here and set it back to to forget the social distancing. We're going to meet with everybody. And look what happened to the curve. It suddenly shot up. And when it shot up, so did the yellow line, the number of people who have been sick. That is, you can't just let up. You need to have a plan. And your plan has to consist of things such as making sure that you maintain wearing masks and washing hands. Maybe there's a partial social distancing that consists of rules or based on whether someone has been sick or not. But we need to get inventive here. In order to shut down this disease, you cannot just suddenly stop and say everything's fine. You'll suddenly get a sudden increase, and that'll increase the number of in the yellow line, and the percentage of the yellow line is the mortality rate. How many people die? So we have to be very careful. So what we've looked at here are, we've looked at a case in which the virus spread across a population, and we saw what would normally happen. Then we tried to shut it down with two separate approaches. One, social distancing, another one, making it difficult to transmit from one person to another. Then we tried both and found out that both was far more successful than either one to get alone. Finally, we looked at the case of what if we're doing very well at keeping both social distancing and making it difficult to transmit, and then suddenly let up on the social distancing. Well, the disease has already spread at a distance through the population, and we let up on the social distancing, and now it can spread again, and we get a sharp rise. We don't want this to happen either. So before we let up on social distancing, we need to think it through about how is it that we're going to control this. Is it going to be through some kind of modified social distancing, or some kind of way to increase the difficulty in passing from one individual to another? We need to give that some good thought. Well, that was pretty cool. We create a simulation of virus by taking simple ideas like people who can move around the screen and they can be sick or not. We provide a way for them to pass a virus from one to another. That's all there was to it. From that, we saw how virus moved through a population. We saw how social distancing and procedures for reducing transmission, such as hand washing, affected the spread of the disease, especially if they were used together. We also played with the idea of what might happen if you let up on social distancing early without having a replacement plan for limiting the spread. That did not go well. Remember, this is just a simple model not designed to simulate COVID-19 specifically. While the numbers may not be specific, they do show important trends such as social distancing and reducing transmission have a huge impact on the outcome. I'm Robert Heckendorn. I teach computer science at the University of Idaho, and I hope you enjoyed our simulation, and I'll catch you later.